by the end of the 90 minutes, we would have had a very nice conversation where it will be very interactive. And I'm looking forward to hearing people's experiences. It's not just about one person, but what other people are also doing, which is quite fantastic. Um, I am also very appreciative of having had the very inspiring conversation with Dima, which is how we're gathered here today. She and I were just talking about our passion for Africa, and we ended up speaking of connections, of shaping narratives, of harnessing energies as a way to look for some avenues that could potentially lead to dialogue and conversations. So, what are we trying to do today? It could be simple, it could be complicated. We're talking about connecting conflict and media coverage. Pardon me. And then we'll talk about research to rediscover and reclaim. It's quite an agenda. Again, what we're trying to do today is to have conversations to try and go beyond what seems to be in front of us, to discover identities and paths that we could trod on together. So my plan is very simple, is to trigger a conversation on number one, conflict, without spending too much time arguing about conflict. We could rather speak of the nature of conflict. Then I'd like to talk about media coverage of conflict as we discuss the nature of media today in Africa. My whole presentation will be based on Africa because that's the place I know the most. And then as a third part, end with a time when we can brainstorm on how research and media can work together in order to shape narratives, synergies, and coalition. So that's my plan, and I hope that you'll find it interesting. First of all, conflict. Okay. My experience of conflicts in Africa is inspired by what's happening on the ground, right? It's less some academic approach, but mostly on the ground, where we are on the ground when we talk to people, when we deal with people, when we eat with them, when we live where they live. What do we call conflict? Okay, so rather than defining conflict, I would rather very humbly say that as on the ground experience, I understand and I realize that the definition of conflict is plural and it's multidimensional. It's really hard to have one definition of what conflict is, because we've seen on the ground that what may be conflict to me may not be conflict to other people, and vice versa. I also understand that conflict can be within one person or between several persons. A lot of times we think that conflict necessarily involves and includes 2, 3, 4, 5 people, and we tend to forget the personal conflicts that we have within us, trying to make decisions on X, Y, and Z, trying to figure out how to move forward. That's also a conflict. So conflict can be within one person and not just between several people. I understand that in conflict, many people may have to intervene in the process, whether they are direct agents, whether they are indirect agents, whether they are remote elements like mediators, all sorts of stakeholders. So sometimes conflict is not just one person or the people who are having some kind of opposition. We also need to look at who's involved, who's included, who's interested. That's what we see on the ground in Africa, because most of the places I've been to, not to generalize, not to give a wide general appreciation of things, but most most of the times in Africa, there are other people involved in trying to sort something out. So that aspect of conflict, we also need to pay attention to it. Now, when we talk about because when we talk about conflict, we talk about resolution or transformation. It's today. There's a play on the word, or people talking about conflict resolution or conflict transformation. But at least resolution of some sort that allows people to move ahead. And we see that people on the ground having a single attempt to deliver a single method of conflict transformation or resolution doesn't work. It really doesn't work, because that single approach doesn't allow spaces in order to understand what is important and what works for specific cases in Africa. As a mediator, you may have a solution for something happening, let's say, in Senegal, and then you are not sure that the same gimmick that you had for Senegal will work for Mali or from Cote d'Ivoire. So this single approach of this is how we solve conflict on the ground in Africa right now is not something that's conducive to communication. So as we search for critical theories and definitions of conflict, because pardon me, that's part of it, what we've seen on the ground is that we need to talk about human basic needs. Every time we've had mediation or we've had something of that nature, excuse me, people most of the times will tell you, they weren't paying attention to what I need, right? They weren't paying attention to what I want. So human basic needs, along with the perception of reality and the perception of human beings, can trigger atrocities, frustrations, and lots of conflict. Several times we've had people telling us they weren't paying attention to what we're saying. We cannot accept this. They're trying to take us for granted. And so my experience is human basic needs and the perception of reality and the perception of human beings. If we're not careful, it may trigger lots of frustrations and block the whole process. At the moment, from an academic perspective, because we also need to talk about academia, critical theories are quite fragmented on the definition of conflict. Lots of schools, in terms of sociology, in terms of ontology, in terms of philosophy, lots of things are very fragmented and lots of different schools. As we were saying earlier, some people will talk about conflict resolution. Others will say we want to talk about conflict transformation. So at the moment, the critical theories are very fragmented, and trying to make sense out of them is not an easy task. Even though now, well, we could say that consensus seems to be, I'm going to be very careful here, but generally speaking, consensus seems to be that we agree on certain parameters. For instance, we agree that all human beings may come with different belief systems. But then again, we're falling into the philosophical, the ontology, into the perception of basic human needs and the perception of reality. So very fragmented, and that's what we're working with at the moment. Trying to, as Dima was saying, trying to make sense out of nonsense. Another difficulty about conflict is that experience on the ground, and really, I keep going back to experience on the ground because that's my thing, if you allow me to say so. Pardon me. So, experience on the ground in conflict transformation or conflict resolution tells us that today, it is really hard to be in a vision that only believes in good human beings versus bad ones, and much less an approach of either or, neither nor. So this lot of talks about the either or, neither nor, good versus bad, and how do we harness all of that to allow people, for instance, let's be practical, when they sit around the table to negotiate an agreement, it's not about good or bad. It's not about we will have this or that. It's not about we'll neither have this nor that. So it's really a conglomerate of different things that allow people to look for, new things, to look for uh, new solutions, to look for new approaches, um, if you will. So beyond why am I talking about this? I know we're talking about media and research. We need to realize that as media, lots of times our understanding of what we're dealing with is very narrow. And I'm saying this because I'm part of the media, because I've worked in conflict resolution or transformation for a while. Our conception of conflict and what's really happening is very narrow. So it's good to take time to kind of talk about some of the backstage stuff, and have a much better understanding, a more progressive and a more open conversation and discussion. Um, Sometimes we sit at the table and speaking of good versus bad, either versus or, neither versus nor. Sometimes we sit at a table and we realize that some people have non-negotiable values. They have non-negotiable things. They would come and say, okay, we're here. First of all, it's really hard to get them to meet in a room. It's really hard to get them to agree to sit down and talk. That in itself is like 75% of the mediation. And then they come in and they're telling you X, Y, and Z are not negotiable. I am not ready to give up on X, Y, and Z because those are important to me. Those are my basic human beings. Um, so um, non-negotiable values have triggered a lot of frustration for mediators, because it doesn't. They don't allow multidimensional approaches. What's important for you? You're sitting here at the table, but what's important for you? And do you understand what's important for the other party or the other parties? Because sometimes lots of people are involved. So um, beyond non-negotiable values, multidimensional approaches and pluralism can really help to avoid reductionism and oversimplification of a very complex world we live in. It's not just a litany of words, multidimensional approach, pluralism, reductionism, oversimplification. But these are the things that we see on the ground, where all of a sudden a mediator or somebody in conflict, the other party, tries to reduce what the other person in the conflict, to trying to reduce what they feel or what they need to something that's really simple and basic and kind of like shoe fly off shoe. So today on the ground in Africa, what we're seeing is that we realize that belief systems influence conflict transformation or conflict resolution because they determine the perception and narratives that shape basic assumptions. So if my I'm just going to take an example. If I'm thinking that and this comes up a lot. I'm thinking that in my culture, I my belief system is saying that I cannot sit around the table and negotiate, pardon me, and negotiate with a woman. Kid you not, those situations pop up because some people believe. I may think whatever I want about it, but some people believe that they cannot sit around the table with a woman and negotiate and mediate and negotiate something. So it's they believe, it's their basic belief system. Again, we cannot think that, well, you know what, this is shoe fly shoe, but no, these are things that we need to take into consideration and really give it a thought, so we can get some transformation or some resolution. So yeah, belief systems influence conflict transformation or conflict resolution as they determine our perception and our narratives that shape basic assumptions. And those basic assumptions are not necessarily negative. An assumption is not necessarily negative. It's also about, okay, what do I understand from the other person? What's important for the other person or the other persons? So again, just to say that reality in Africa is complex, I don't need to say it here, but I feel that it would be good to just kind of put it on the table. Reality in Africa is very complex. Maybe I should say realities are very complex. And the need to generate knowledge requires from us more and more complex thinking processes. This is why I was telling you earlier, yeah, we're talking about the media here, but why we're spending time with these intellectual, theoretical approaches to conflict, what is conflict, and etc. It's because we are seeing more and more now, we're seeing that complex thinking processes need to be put in place. It's just that simple. They need to be put in place because things are not easy. Things are complex, complicated. Things take a long time. Just to in Mali a few years back, to get the Tuareg to come and sit at the table, right? The amount of negotiations that went just to get them to sit at a table and talk. And then when they showed up, they had their guns, and people were like, "No, you cannot come in with the guns." They're like, "Well, in that case, we're leaving." You know, so these are very important things, and it's very complex, and lots of people give a lot of importance to those basic assumptions. Reality in Africa is complex. We need to generate, again, I'm repeating this, we need to generate more and more complex thinking processes so that we can move forward. What we see in Africa when it comes to conflict is that conflict in Africa is about colliding interests. It's about the meeting of opposite elements. It's also about confrontation of basic needs. So colliding interest, in North Kivu, the situation there with what's happening with MONUSCO, the UN peacekeeping force, the regular Congolese army, and the ADF Nalu, which makes it a triangle, we call triangle of death. They have colliding interest. We've seen cases where an NGO would come in and into that area and then bring lots of medical supplies, because there's a health center, in infirmerie that's there, but you know, women don't have the required stuff when they give birth. Sometimes there are some armed groups that attack, and so there's no basic stuff to take care of people who are wounded and stuff. So what's happened is we've noticed that when, for instance, NGOs come in with a bunch of supplies, we've noticed that attacks happen again, because people just go to the health center and loot everything that's there, because yeah. So colliding, conflicting interest, right? We're trying to bring stuff to cure people, but other people who are in the area, part of the conflict, they need it. So, so yeah, colliding interest. Conflict in Africa is about colliding interest. This is what I want. Um, I don't really care about what you want, but for me, this is what I want. This is what's happening in Libya and Mali and Chad when some people were promised after Gaddafi, some people were promised all sorts of things uh, by the French, namely. And so all of a sudden, it takes another dimension of, okay, is this a new country? Is who promised this? What president promised this? And where's he at right now? And where's Sarkozy? So yeah, so lots of colliding interests. Also, the meeting of opposite elements. That's conflict. The meeting of opposite elements. What I want is not necessarily what you want, and vice versa. So there's that level too. And then the confrontation of basic needs. Conflict is in Africa is about confrontation of basic needs. I need X, Y, and Z. You need ABC, and we'll fight it out until somebody wins. A lot of times, that's what the so that's what the situation is all about, right? The other thing about conflict is conflict can happen anytime, anywhere, with or without early warnings. I know there are lots of people putting together early warning frameworks and working on it, which is absolutely phenomenal. But lots of times in Africa, conflict doesn't tell you, look, I'm going to happen. It's just it pops out. Now, yeah, true. You can see the routine, if I may say so. You can see the path that the conflict is taking, and you can kind of see where it's going to go. But conflict can happen anytime, anywhere, with basically no warning. No warning. Traveling through Africa, training journalists to cover conflict, I have seen very clearly that processes are not necessarily linear, right? Again, we're going back to this complex processes in order to move forward. Processes are not necessarily linear. Things are much more complex than they seem. And sometimes a very successful mediator in Senegal may not be a successful mediator in Cote d'Ivoire. Simple, because maybe in Senegal that mediator has his or her ins and outs that they don't have in Cote d'Ivoire. So things are more complex than they look. And on top of that, we see that the world is changing every day. It's amazing. As much as we live together, as much as we're connected, as much as a phone call is, somebody is a phone call away, not even a phone call away, because a phone call might be expensive, but social media call away to connect. So as much as we live together, our values and our objectives become more and more competitive in our communities and our society. I'm not trying to get into this Marx or Engels approach of capitalism, but what we're seeing is that we are more and more competitive. We have less and less time. We are, we don't have time. We don't have time. We gotta go. We gotta go. We gotta go. So theoretically speaking, we live in a connected world, a world that becomes richer thanks to our different cultures, if you may, thanks to our different opinions, thanks to our different experiences. That's theoretically, because tension is often taken for conflict. There's also that part where tension is not necessarily conflict, right? Tension might be dynamic, right? So in Africa, we realize that conflict is an everyday life thing, personal, professional, family, public space. You go to the you're trying to get you're trying to go from A to B, and so you go to the bus station, and yeah, you need to fight your way through with all sorts of um, in between people, all that kind of stuff. So conflict is there all the time in Africa. Conflict is everywhere. It can be rather simple. It can be very complex. Conflict can have positive outcome. Conflict can have atrocious effects. To the point that some experts are saying that conflict is unavoidable. Violence is avoidable, but people are saying that conflict is not avoidable. Conflict is unavoidable. Um, Conflict can be triggered by various things: disagreement over management of resources, miscommunication, misconception and misjudgment, difficulties like unemployment, lack of financial resources, lack of trust. And in that context, the media today is challenged in its coverage of conflict. The media have got to change their way of operating. And the challenge today is for the media to learn to support more complexities and to create new and different processes and channels that allow multidisciplinary conversations. That's so clear. Um, Hence the need to be patient for a profession that needs to be fast. Breaking news doesn't wait for, but breaking news is not patient. Breaking news happens now and needs to be distributed right now. That brings up some issues. So conflict coverage in Africa has taught me to expect the unpredictability of things. Media today, working in a global ownership settings, are used to functions with international sets and international formats. Um, you go to the US, Fox News is Fox News everywhere, right? The bottom line, there may be some differences from New York to California, but it's the same ownership, is the same idea, same idea. So coming to the media, do the media grasp the complexity of conflict? Do they work in tight, time-sensitive, competition-driven, reductionist approach that encourages linear formats but no complexities, no interdependence, and no relative autonomy? That's what we're seeing with the media today. So how is conflict covered in Africa right now? May I here state that we have encountered on the ground in Africa, as we cover conflict, we've encountered several things. There's a difference between journalists and media. Okay, journalists are people with their belief systems and their training. Media is an institution with owners and editorial lines. Because sometimes we blame journalists while what we really wanted to do was blame the media. Today, we're wondering whether journalists in Africa are equipped to go beyond the ethical approach that we're all taught in journalism school. You got to be fair, balanced, that kind of hoo-ha. You need to deal with the famous W's: what, where, when, who, the how, why, eventually. Beyond that basic journalism, are we equipped to go further? How do we explain conflict? Is a report confined to a classic blow-by-blow account? Does that do what we need to do? Go on the ground and say, okay, so and so did this, and so it responded, and and that's it. We stop right there. Is that what we call journalism today? Do we realize that the media's coverage influences the behavior of parties involved in a conflict? Um, can media practitioners take responsibility for the consequences of their reports? What understanding do we have of objectivity? Is objectivity a state, or is it an objective, if I may say so? Is it something that's here? You know, we have objectivity, or is it something that we're working towards? Does media coverage influence policy making? So another challenge for the media, does the shrinking of deep coverage with analysis encourage policymakers to focus on superficial responses? In other words, when we don't have analyses, when we don't have deep thinking, when we don't have research, aren't we giving policymakers an easy way out not to address conflict resolution? So again, on the ground in Africa, we are faced with very complex processes of disinformation that the media have to work with, right? Um, war strategies and propaganda are so hard to understand, and the media are part of that propaganda. Let us not think that, oh, no, war strategies and propaganda is something different. No, the media are part and parcel of propaganda strategies. So we know that war strategies and propaganda are so hard to understand. For instance, to break it down, who sends troops? Who sends equipment? Why? In case of an armed conflict, it's nice to kind of look into who sends troops, who sends equipment, and why. Political reasons, economical reasons, geostrategic reasons. European countries have always been accused that while they are in economic crisis, they have started wars just for oil. European and American administrations have been accused of starting wars to prevent African leaders from starting alternative programs that will steer African countries away from Europe and from the US. Are they trying to get rid of someone considered evil by them? And are they supporting and allowing another leader whose atrocities and human rights violation will be accepted by the senders of the troop? Many times we've seen atrocities happening, but nothing really happens of it because the person committing the atrocities is some kind of a ally for European and American countries. Another question that we ask ourselves very often is, these people, are they trying to get rid of someone considered evil? Right? It's like, okay, this person doesn't cut it. We got to get rid of them. Do European and American countries who send troops to Africa do it for the African people, or rather as a way not to endanger a global world order that serves their purposes in order to keep their influence in Africa? Those are questions that we need to ask. Do media relay fabricated messages? Who benefits from fabricated messages? Do media realize that conflicts may start with a lie, like fighting against a direct enemy, or we want to liberate local people, or we're in there for humanitarian reasons? So do we realize that media are part of a wider strategic propaganda that aims to shape national and international opinion in favor of an intervention? Because sometimes the intervention is an option on the table, but in order for people to buy into it, there's a whole propaganda and strategy put together so people can understand, oh, wow, yeah, we need this. So in a word, media have been part of war propaganda. Media has been accused of hiding history, hiding financial interest, scaring people off, or demonizing the opposition, using spin doctors, fabricate lies and create an enemy, arm allies who may only be allies for a short while, monopolize, hog, and shape the narrative, or really censoring of opposition information. So at this point, my question is this. We all know the media, but the question is, who owns the media? Who makes decisions? Again, let's make sure we understand the difference between media practitioners and the media. In Africa today, big fortunes and big money own and run media. Some of them are entrepreneurs, they're hotel owners, they're clerics, they're constructors, they're artists, they're politicians. So the news delivered seems to serve the interest of the owner or of the owners, who are mostly allies of politicians, like governments and opposition, also allies of religious leaders. Information and news treatment, as we know it, is filtered and scanned in a way the media offers a platform for an owner of the media to monetize their platform, to monetize it to their allies, their friends, even the allies are even if the allies are just financial allies. So the state, the media, and capital have become one complex entity with friends who are shareholders, primetime presenters, members of board of directors, and so on and so forth. These are people working for their own pockets as they try to force a dominant global mainstream vision of the world. In Africa, sales alone do not fund and or cover the production or the production costs of a newspaper. Again, in Africa, sales alone do not fund and cover the production costs of a newspaper. Production of a newspaper is paid for by advertising. So what's happening in Africa is the media sells the buyer to the advertiser. If I go and buy a newspaper, basically I'm being sold to an advertiser. Sold to an advertiser. Yeah, I see that some questions are already coming. Ronell Stevens saying that in South Africa, we are not encouraged to look people in the eye when we are speaking, especially people who are older or senior in ranking. For Westerners, that is seen as a case of conflict, as being deceitful. Ronell, I couldn't agree more. Ronell, I've spent time in the West, as people say, and if you do not look at your the person you're talking to, if you don't look at them, you're hiding something, right? As opposed to in Africa, you don't look in the eye of an elder. You're absolutely right. So Ronell, I would be interested. I would love to find out what do you think? How do you think we can manage that? You know, we are citizens of the world. You know, we travel, we live in all parts of the world, and so we have to do this. When you go to Africa, you talk to your mom, you cannot look at her straight in the eyes, because otherwise it's some sort of a defiance. But then you go to the West, if you do not look at your the person you're talking to in the in the eyes, you're hiding something. So Ronell, I'd be I'm no not I'd be I'm interested in finding out uh, what you think of that. So when you're ready to speak, I think Dima can bring you in. Um, and so we were talking about African media who go very fast, where deep analysis is not encouraged or even assigned. Today, funding for inquiries, funding for analysis, funding for deep analysis reportage doesn't really happen. All that happens is you have someone sitting somewhere writing news briefs for maybe 10 news outlets. And sometimes you read something and you realize that, wow, um, this was, I read this somewhere else, exactly word for word, because that's what's happening now. Somebody central writes the news and somebody takes it, and then that's it. No deep analysis anymore. And the deep analysis today um, gets you in trouble. A lot of journalists who have spoken up about this and that were demonized, were harassed, they lost their job. Um, uh, that's the situation we're dealing with, right? So my point here is that news and information are controlled by networks and circles that only care about their own financial gain and supremacy. That's what we're seeing. Even in Africa, that's what we're seeing today. In order to control natural and mineral resources, these networks and circles are ready to do anything to destabilize Africa and put people in power who will run their respective countries as directed to do so. The think about it as a retail chain, right? You have a retail chain. The coffee they serve in California needs to be the coffee they serve in New York. Needs to be the same coffee they serve in Seattle. And so for them to be able to do that, everybody needs to listen to, this top-down management style. And you being a manager of a store in a chain doesn't really mean much, because you're there to apply what corporate is asking you to do. Our countries in Africa are run the same way. It's no exaggeration. We've heard of government meetings which agenda had to be validated by France, or you want to talk, what are you going to talk about during your government meeting when all the ministers and all the secretary of states and stuff are there? You do not have, it used to be up until very recently, cases where people didn't have the liberty or the freedom to decide what they were going to talk about at their meetings. They had to submit the agenda to the former colonizer, who decides, okay, this yes, that no, this yes, that no. So just micromanagement. I understand micromanagement because I've worked in micromanagement for a long time, and the frustration and all the things happening. That's how our countries are run. And You can be a president who serves the purposes of France. Then you're fine. You can do whatever you want, atrocities, whatever you want. You can appoint yourself to high whatever titles because you are a friend of the former colony. The day you are not doing what the former colony wants you to do, you're out of there. You are so out of there. So, in that setting, African journalists and media practitioners are working with most, how am I going to say this? We are working with fear, right? African journalists are working with fear. Fear's right there. Fear not to get your paycheck, if there's one. Fear not to get the money that you're supposed to get at the end of the month. Fear you might lose your job and somebody else will come and take it. So the journalist needs to balance the fears and the decisions they need to make. So I'm going to speak about a couple of things and then allow you actually to jump in and share. Dima saying you cautioned against blaming the journalist versus blaming the media. How can communities for alliances? How can communities from alliances with journalists? Dima, can you read your comment again? How can communities form alliances with journalists? So it's like a mind reader because that's what I want to attack now. It's ownership. There's nothing we can do in terms of media in Africa if we do not have ownership. That's number one. Number two, training. Training. Because we go to journalism school and we're trained on ethics and that kind of stuff. We are not trained on critical thinking. And even if we're trained, we fear. Right? I have a family. I have charges. I have things to do. Now, what do I want? I want to lose my job, or I would need to do what I usually do and keep my job because my family needs the cash. So ownership, training, equipment. You see the conditions under which journalists in Africa are working with. It's an absolute nightmare. It's an absolute nightmare. In North Kivu in the DRC, the station I worked with there to train some journalists, somebody built a studio for them, which is absolutely great, with some basic equipment. The problem is when it rains, you cannot do mic work. It's a rainforest, because the roof is zinc. So when it rains in North Kivu, I mean, it rains. It's thunderstorms. And then you have this music tapping on the zinc roof, corrugated roof, right? And so when that happens, when it's raining and they have something to do, they will just go to music. See, these are some of the real things that we're dealing with, right? And the last thing, Dima, if I may, we need to be better at financial management. We need to be better at financial management. Look at what's happening, and I can stop it right there. Look at what's happening. Okay, all right. Let me say this. Look at what's happening in underwriting in the U.S. Such and such foundation underwrote such and such program, and we kind of find it okay, because without that money, we couldn't have done, theoretically, what the money allowed us to do. So You have foundation somebody and somebody else, right? So I'm just going to say that so I don't get in trouble. So foundation somebody and somebody else. Um, they fund with trust fund money. They fund a huge beverage company, which I will call Coca-Loca. And Coca-Loca is going to work with 50,000 farmers in Africa. But the work is on a special fruit. It's not about what Africans need to grow. No. So it's this whole issue about genetically modified foods, where Foundation so-and-so funds a big corporation, a beverage corporation, Coca-Loca, and their job is to train 50,000 African farmers. Why do we need to give money to Coca-Loca, which is a huge corporation already? And then you realize that former members of Coca-Locas administration, they're actually working with the foundation so-and-so, right? So those are the situations where you go to community radio stations in Africa. They don't even have a generator that works so they can be on the air. All they do is rely on NGOs to come and help a bit. And so they have underwriting. In other cases, you have some big foundations who are based out of the US, whose staff is based out of the US, whose budget is such that not even 5% of their budget goes to Africa, because they're spending a lot of money into salaries, these huge salaries, these trips, these, hotel rooms, and the entire staff is in the US, based in the US, with big salaries. So that's where the contradiction is. And my last point, if I may, is media and Dima, to answer your question too, how can we form alliances? Media and academia need to work together. However, it's not the academia that's funded by Foundation so-and-so, right? Because we've seen experts intervene on talk shows, and because they're experts, so they believe that we understand and we agree with what they're saying. But what we need is real academic stuff that's independent, that's free, so that academic research helps media to really present things the way they can help communities and populations form alliances with the media. Because the other thing is, you may have a community where the community radio station is in a rural zone, is funded by an MP or by a politician. Well, that radio will be talking about what's important to the MP. You see, so we need real research. I'll leave it at that, and hopefully it's triggered some things that we could talk about. But I'm really um, uh, I'm really anticipating. I really want to hear from you, and how your experience can help us move forward, because that's what we are all about. That's what we're all about. Dima?
Yes. Hello. And thank you very much for that. Most insightful discussion. One of the comments I put it on the thing. You know, I try my best not to inflate.
Dima, please do. I'm looking forward to that.
You know, it was Rodrigo. She was as soon as
Come
she
on.
listened in, because I've tagged a few friends who this topic is very dear
Yeah.
to, and central, and that I've personally had conversations with them about the necessity and the need to reclaim our narrative from the
Yeah.
perspective of, you know, is the media really reporting with solutions in mind, with finding solutions in mind, or is it reporting to sort of flame the fires even more, so that it triggers panic, it triggers and
Yeah.
continues to sort of smoke, and distract from what's actually happening, so that things like what you just said keep getting hidden in all the smoke. You know, all these
Right.
connections between who owns this particular media company and what's their role in relation to the government, or in relation,
Right.
to
Right.
what that's about to be developed. So um, I'm very, very grateful for you having brought these discussions, you know, center stage, and contextualized them within the African context, because this is your area of expertise. I would very much like to see how we can take this same understanding, and or this same lens, and sort of zoom out and see how that relates to the larger, and more increasing right now, global Black Lives Movement. Because what
Yeah.
we're seeing, and especially from mainstream media, like as you said, you know, Fox News is Fox News wherever you watch it, or CNN is CNN wherever you watch it. And earlier in the panel today with Black men, mentoring, and mental health, you know, we were talking about BBC Africa and what that means in terms of coverage and relevance to our truth, to our story, to what's actually happening on the ground. How can
Right.
we, as people of African ancestry, navigate a system that has empowered media as essentially a weapon against us, to silence us?
Right. Right. Well, as you very well known, Dima, BBC Africa, they aren't reporting stuff for us.
Yeah.
You know, they're reporting and they're working. They have lots of equipment. They have very good salaries, so they're comfortable, and they're reporting from a Queen's perspective. BBC Africa belongs to the UK, so they cannot the perspective of the analysis. I mean, not to be all theoretical. I have friends who work for the BBC Africa. I have worked with them. Um, there is a certain canvas that, as a journalist, you have to go through to report on something. Right? It's not because it's happening right in front of you that you can report on it. But it's, for instance, if Agence France Presse or if Reuters talks about it, well, yeah, then you can talk about it. So the same with Radio France Internationale, the same with France 24, the same with TV5, the same with France Info. These are media that are run by the French government and their friends. And it's so funny when you have elections or something like that, you see all these foreign guys being in the country covering elections. But they're not going to the people and ask them. They're going to interview Youssou N'Dour, or they're going to interview, but my friend Youssou N'Dour is an advisor to the president, right? So how do you think that interview is going to go, Dima? You think your worry and my worry, TV5 and France 24, are going to talk about it? No. And even at the local level, you ask this dynamite question about how do we make alliances. We have in Senegal media that's owned by entrepreneurs. Those entrepreneurs are very close to the government. So the editorial line is, we talk to the opposition, they say something, the next day is somebody from the government who comes and refute everything people said the day before. And they call that balanced. See, so
it is ridiculous. And I'm very grateful to be discussing this with you, because actually that's something I'll be discussing in a later panel today called The Accidental Activist. And it just so happens that um, the three people speaking, and potentially four, are all Sudanese. And it will come from the angle of, how do you find yourself, when you find yourself at the middle of, of a movement, of a revolution, and we're all talking about reclaiming this narrative, we're all talking about stepping into our truth, but at the same time, we still need this truth to reach people. And if we don't have ownership of this narrative, and we don't have the platforms to share these narratives, then how do we do it? Yeah, sure, there is citizen journalism, whatever that might mean. Because now even that is
ownership is very important.
Yes, but then you have, oh yeah, yes. But with citizen journalism, I feel like it started off as something that is great and is celebrated in the right way, and certain attention is being given to it. But then it ultimately ended up being something that is controlled as well. Someone ends up controlling who is a citizen journalist, or who gets the attention, or whose platform gets more followers or gets more thing, and we get lost in that. So what are some of the tips?
Okay, I'm hearing you coming in chopped up.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Family, wherever you're tuning in from the world, please tell us where you're tuning in from. Tell us if there are certain media trends in your community that you have realized.
Yeah, the last 2 minutes that you've been speaking, I have no idea what you talked about because it's all chopped.
Or your revolution. And here we have Henri coming back with us. Henri, welcome
Yes,
back.
thank you.
Tell me, you said you couldn't hear what I was saying. What was the last thing you heard?
That was 2 minutes ago about ownership, and everything was just all chopped up.
Right. So I was talking about citizen journalism and how, as a concept, that's very empowering. But now, even now, we are seeing a bit of a tendency to own even that, to institutionalize that. And I don't mean it in an empowering way. I mean it in a controlling way, in an ownership way, in a then invoking bias kind of way. How do we go back to empowering the citizen, to empowering the community itself, to own that narrative, to own how their story is being told?
Right. And it goes as much as it's very plateau to say this, it all goes back to the ownership. What do we want to do with the media outlet that we have? Right. What do we want to do with this? Do we want to keep getting money from NGOs and foundations and government because we want to talk about something that's not very challenging? Or do we want to do what we're doing here now, which is we want to talk about the narrative? Right. And as uncomfortable as it is, that's what needs to happen. It's the narrative, reshaping the narrative. It's like, why do we have to depend on foundation, someone to send us money, or an NGO to send us money to do radio? Do we as Africans have resources, like as farmer or something like that? Do we have resources we can use to develop our narrative?
And if we were going to take this in a solution-based angle, again, because we have
Could
10
be
trying
to run a radio station
Oh, you got
instead
disconnected.
of just sitting there waiting for foundation, someone to send money. So it's about the ownership, and it's about the, okay, how do we manage this? Because so far we are managing things from a very Western perspective. You have the money from an NGO, you work. You don't have the money, nothing will happen. Well, let's go look for the money. You have cocoa, you have, I don't know, you have oranges, I don't know, you have stuff that you're harvesting. When you sell some of that, can everybody in the community have a little percentage of the sales, saying, okay, this is for the radio station? Why can't we do that? And then we're just sitting there waiting for somebody to bring the money. So we are in chains. We are in chains. I worked in Dakar with a big Pan-African station that was funded by a philanthropist, and
Oh, and we lost Henri. Saba saying, I agree, let's go look for the money. Okay, Saba, but how do we, until we find the money, how do we keep going, and how do we encourage people to contribute until we reach that point of the money? Henri, we lost you, but we do have Saba here with a very fresh point. Hey
there.
Welcome.
Hello. Good morning. Good afternoon, almost. Good afternoon now.
Hi, Saba.
Hi there. I love what you're saying so much. I mean, I was coming into the broadcast like, I was thinking about that stuff when I was like 12, I think. I was like, how can I take whatever I'm getting over here and how can I give it back to Ethiopia? Like, literally, how can I do it? And I was like, I have no idea. But like I don't know if you realize that you're just spitting facts. Like, you're just like, broadcast radio station. I'm just like, oh my gosh, wait, that's such a good idea. Because recently I was like, do I want to become an editor of a magazine? Like, is that what I want to do? But it's going to have to be one of these, you know? And for all of us, it has to be a way. So thank you so much. Oh, there you go. Yeah.
Again, well, again, I go back to my question. Right, we do have the money, and until we get the money, and this is something that I think I mentioned to you as well, it's been a struggle with and now even with Africa Week on some level, because as much as it's a labor of love, we still need a way to sustain it. Like, you know, we're gonna need to find people to help, you know, either partner with us in streaming or whatever, and this is a whole other discussion. But as long as you're a young organization and you're there with a very, very, very loud drum or loud bell, no one wants to trust a kid with a bell for or a drum, because that means you're going to be creating a lot of noise. You're going to be making a lot of noise. So how
yeah.
do you, when you're literally saying that's a kid that won't stop until they get what they want, and they want that drum, can you buy them that drum? You know, how are we expecting that?
I was actually just thinking about that because I realized all the stuff that I know, like, and I have in my head and I'm trying to give out to my platform, like, probably nobody knows that. So I'm thinking, okay, this is neutral information. I'm just going to slide it out, not cause a ruckus. And people are like, oh my gosh. And I'm just like, y'all know it gets worse, right? Like, y'all know that there's global oppression, right? Or no? Are we not on this same congruent level of the fact that like bigger oppression exists? So everything's gonna seem like, you know, that shock value, I feel like. And at the point that, you know, I labeled myself a college student activist, that's when I became a threat in their eyes. And no matter how politically correct I try and make myself, they're gonna see me as a threat. Just now, the my school's independent newspaper has been colluding with the administration. Yeah, independent. They literally told me in emails that they were going to the administration to ask what they thought about this thing. I'm just like, what? Like, this is an interview that I did with 4 other activists. We're sitting around a table, we're talking about our grievances, kind of, and how we just haven't heard anything from the administration of the school. Sorry, University of Maryland, for context. And it's just like, for them to go to the university, want to take quotes from them, and then come back and want to take quotes from me. It's like, is this a conversation now? Am I just being featured in this conversation? Because if they wanted to talk to me, they could, but they haven't for the last 4 months. And that's where this media stuff really gets to. That's why I really wanted to come into this one, because I'm just like, the narratives and the power in having your own narrative, but being diminished, like your narrative being diminished. I feel like that's the part that hurts me as an organizer, because it's like, all I can do is continuously try hard. I can't like try harder because this person is like coming in and trying to make things worse for me. I have to just consistently keep going forward. And with all this stuff being thrown like in the way. So I feel like people should get more credit for that. Like you should get more credit for that, for this, Dima, because like, what, like, I already heard in the opening statement, you're talking about sleepless nights, and I'm just like, oh my goodness. And I mean, just looking at the schedule, it's like, wow, Africa Week really did that. So I'm thankful. So thank you.
Well, it's about to get even more serious right now, because and we'll talk about this later, because yeah, now we can't stream the playlists that we've organized. So now it's just going to be an open study circle. So bring out your notes and the stuff you need to work on, and this is going to be a virtual co-working space. But before we wrap things up here, I'd like Henri to maybe give us some tips, maybe 3 pointers, if you can, about how can we empower our community to really reframe how we look at ownership when it comes to the narrative and when it comes to the media. Because as we said, you know, the more we try and look for that money, the more it's just going to be, well, who are you and what's your intention with this platform? And as long as our intention is to ring the alarm, and as long as our intention is to bring down that system, it's just, we're not likely to get the response we're looking for. So where do we, one, find that money? And two, until we find that money, do we just wait, or what can we do to reclaim that narrative? Henri? Ooh, we have Henri coming in from a different panel here. Hello? Hello, hello. Let's see. Oh, Henri, you're muted, I think, from both.
I can take a stab at it,
yeah,
until they get their stuff together. I mean, so something I think about a lot is just, how we can be more strategic. I know that everyone is very strategic in their own ways, but I feel like if we really stay very in touch with current events, then, because I stay very up to date with current events. I think it's because of my mix of knowing like local officials as like people that I like used to go to school with, and then also just knowing everything that's going on the ground and everything. I think that if those two things, like for example, today in College Park, there's a talk with the interim police chief. I'm gonna go there, but imagine if everybody that ever said anything about defunding the police was there. You know, those are the kinds of things, while they are not our things, we didn't host it. I actually probably had nothing to do with it, because it's like, I think I'm going into like a Zoom room that the police host, but that kind of thing is important for them to like hear our voice. So I think strategizing, like my entire timeline is built around the election. I actually don't want to do any events before the election. I don't want anyone to get this confused with like a voting initiative or anything like that. Like this is very different, and it's about like action and getting change. So like just those kinds of things. Like obviously I could do an event before November 3rd. Like I'm sure no one would think like, but for me, I know where I want to keep my energy, and I want to save it for running through the finish line. And so that's what I'm thinking as far as like what we could do.
Thank you. Thank you. Henri, do we have you back? We have 3 minutes before we leave this panel. You are muted if you are speaking. We can't hear you. Please be sure to unmute. Yes.
Can you hear me? Dima, can you hear me?
I can hear you. I can hear you. Hello. Oh, the tech gremlins are informed today. Bon. Henri, tu m'entends? Hello, hello, hello. And I think we lost Saba as well. Or I don't know, maybe she has left. Well, we've lost the connection once again. I hope that Henri's schedule would allow for him to come back for a discussion. We are having a follow-up on this topic later on in the week, also about connecting the dots again and making sense of the nonsense of it all. Henri, are you there? You are muted if you're speaking. We can't hear you. You're muted. Make sure you're unmuted before you do it. Won't allow me to do it because it says you have chosen to mute yourself. In the meantime, I read Zoe's comment. Joey, whoa, the dyslexia there. Joey, waiting is a transition to failure. Education and self-dependency is the road to all goals. Yes, agreed. I share to that. And this is what we try to do here. This is what we were hoping to keep achieving and growing here on this platform. Henri, I don't know if you can hear me or if the connection has been lost. We unfortunately, for this time around, have to bring this session to a close. We will be coming back with more of these discussions, more ways to reclaim the media. In fact, there is a panel later on today at 1 p.m. exactly. So in half an hour, that is specifically about that. And then there's a later panel later in the week about media literacy. So please check the calendar online. Again, I will drop the link here. It's on our website. It's africaweek2020.com, September calendar. In the meantime, we thank you for tuning in and stay tuned for more. The next panel starts in 15 minutes and we have a family from South Africa, Sister Ronelle Stevens, coming through once again. So stay tuned with us and remember, please, please, please remember to refresh your browser. Thank you and see you in a bit.